See, there's been friends who weren't really friends, and there's been those with painted faces, and they're just places that you've been. You can't recall the love 'cause it left no traces, just a wanting in your soul for some peaceful places. Well, I don't need you, especially when it rains. You take away my pain. Don't it sound good saying my name? Let love flow like a runaway train. Gonna lay it all down on a railroad track and we'll never look back. No, we will never look back. Hey, I wanna feel high like I did back then when time passed slowly and a friend was still a friend. And I wanted you to be just what you said you'd be to me, always right beside me to the very end. And I wanna paint skies, I wanna leave time and feel with my hands, let my eyes be blind. You know, when I hear your voice, I've got no choice. I wanna be with you, yes I do. When you can't recall the love 'cause it left no traces, just some wanting in your soul for some peaceful places. Well, I don't need you, especially when it rains. You take away my pain. Don't it sound good? Say my name. Let love flow like a runaway train. We're gonna lay it all down on a railroad track. Will you ever look back? No, never look back. I said, now don't it sound good? Say my name. Let love flow like a runaway train. Gonna lay it all down on a railroad track. Do you ever look back? No, oh no, don't you ever look back. Oh no, don't you ever look back. Hey,
You know I hate the phone, but I can't leave it home alone. The moment I reflect, I get static on my TV set. Something tells me you don't mean no harm, but if I'm lucky, yeah, you might still die in my arms. tells me you don't mean no harm. But if I'm lucky, yeah, you might still die in my arms.
Policeman, please don't take my stuff. It cost me too much money and it probably ain't enough to get me through election day. And didn't I hear you say, it's alright, it's alright, it's alright. No, it wouldn't weigh a thing, it's hardly worth your time. My luck's been bad, the telephone just kept my only dime, and there might be a burglary. Why don't you just go and see? Be alright, be alright, be alright.
You guys all set? Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. That's definitely on. So this panel today is called Branded Content with Integrity. I'm really happy to see you guys all here. It's a really important topic, and I think something important for journalists to be talking about. So I'm going to just go ahead and introduce our panelists, and then I'll do a short intro on what branded content is, and then we'll jump into questions. And we'll also do some Q&A afterwards if you guys have questions as well, so definitely be thinking about that. Sorry, the computer just died. Sorry about that, my computer just went into sleep. So I'll just go ahead and get started talking a little bit about branded content. So basically it means a lot of different things to different publications. It can be called content marketing, native advertising, advertorial, and so every publication does it a little bit differently, but just a few examples to give you an idea of what it is. The Creators Project is something that was done between Vice and Intel, so it's a separate website, but it's co-created between a brand and a publication. Another example would be a story on women inmates, which was done by the New York Times, along with Netflix and Orange is the New Black. And then another great example is the Future of Travel series, which was produced on Mashable, and it was done for Marriott. So there's different levels of brand integration, and different ways to disclose that. And so we'll be kind of talking about branded content broadly today. So going ahead to introduce the panelists. Deanna began her career writing about obituaries for the Metro West Daily News prior to launching the content studio at digiday.com. She earned her master's in journalism from Northwestern and covered the advertising industry at Adweek magazine. She's also worked as a trends reporter and writer for global advertising agencies JWT and Havas. Nisha is the content strategist and branded content manager at New York Media. She got her professional start in publishing as an editor for Entertainment Weekly and Nylon magazines before working as brand strategist, content strategist, and senior copywriter for brands such as Madewell, Perrier, and Showtime. And finally, Bill is editor-in-chief of digital content at Nielsen. He began his career as a reporter-photographer for various local newspapers in New Mexico and Arizona, and then transitioned to editor roles at several B2B publications serving the casino industry. Before Nielsen, Bill spent 11 years as senior editorial manager at Standard & Poor's. And finally, I'm Danny Finkhauser, and I'm the branded content editor at Bustle.com. So, starting out, Gawker, for example, has boasted that their branded content team is on a completely separate floor than their editorial team. So kind of keeping in line with the traditional idea that sales and then editorial are two separate things and there should be a firm wall between them. So when it comes to branded content, does editorial have a place in that? And what do you think, Deanna?
No, everyone go home. No, I think, different places handle this differently. At Digiday, we also kind of believe that there needs to be a firm wall. And I think if you look across the industry, you'll see that most places believe that there needs to be a separation between the folks that are creating the branded content and the folks that are creating the edit content. And it's to maintain that church-state, kind of division that makes journalism work. But, there is a small role for editorial, and I think that's in a consultative fashion. For example, Hearst Men's Group, for example, creates a lot of branded content for various folks, and we've spoken to them, and one of the things that they've told us is that, they'll go to their editors and say, well, what's on your wish list? What do you think would be appropriate as sponsored content for this client? What do you think that we could use this particular activation to do to bankroll, a wish list series that you've always wanted to do in kind of an editorially independent way. And in that sense, it's kind of like using sponsors in a more traditional sense, and where they're kind of supporting the work that you already do, but then plugging them in a content fashion, be it through a video or a series of articles or something like that. The other thing that you should keep in mind is that if you want to create content that really works for the audience, everybody should really be looking at the same information. So at Digiday, for example, we're looking at information about what stories perform well, what are the headlines that do well, very much along the lines of, what you might see on, BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed is king of the listicle. A lot of their sponsor contents are listicles. So there's a role for editorial, but not in the way that a lot of people fear that it is. It's more in kind of like a, consultative, I think that sums it up.
Well, I would say over where I am at New York Magazine, it's basically, we want to preserve the integrity of editorial. It's very important to us. We do well. We have a reputation to preserve. So I would say, I guess I would cast it more as like an open line of communication. We're constantly, reflexively communicating with each other. They know what we're doing. We know what they're doing. Should anybody have concerns, which hasn't really come up since I've been there, certainly they would be voiced, but luckily we don't seem to be having those problems right now. And I think that's because we're constantly communicating with each other as to what we're doing, from my end, what clients we're working on and what we're doing with them. And editorial is always letting us know sort of what's in their forecast.
I'm a little bit of an odd man out here in that, I work in a 100% branded content environment. So from my perspective, good content is good content. And I've found that most good content comes from folks with editorial backgrounds. And that's just something that I think is probably going to continue to happen, and I think it's good for everyone.
Definitely. It definitely seems to be an issue of sharing knowledge. So obviously when an advertiser comes to a publication and wants to reach their audience, they can create the best piece of content possible, but the editors are the ones that know what their audience wants and how they want it. So moving on to disclaimers, when the New York Times, who recently launched sponsored content on their site, it had, I think, over 10 different disclaimers between different fonts to shading, if you're actually going to count them all up. Meanwhile, other publications might be criticized for not having enough disclaimers, that someone might see a piece of content and have no idea that it was paid for. So in your experience, how is branded content designed differently, and how should it be designed differently? And what else are the differences between branded content and the straight editorial content on your sites?
Yeah, for us, all of our branded content, and I think this is true for many publications, front and center at the very top will say sponsor story. So you know immediately once you're entering or starting to read one of these stories that it is branded content. Additionally, and perhaps even more relevantly, are what we call traffic drivers, little boxes or elements on other home pages. In our case, each vertical has its own homepage for like The Cut or Vulture or Science of Us. And then we, of course, have the larger New York Magazine homepage. All of those will indicate sponsor content as well, and some of those elements as well also have kind of specific different designs that kind of stick out, so you know it's not necessarily editorial.
Yeah, I mean, Digiday covers the digital media and marketing industry, so it's really important that we meet a pretty high bar ourselves. We make sure that every article that is sponsored is labeled. We make sure that there's a big yellow flag on all our sponsored stories. I mean, you really can't miss it. And that appears, no matter where on the site you go, and you might find sponsored content. Native advertising has taken a lot of flack for its poor labeling, or what some people say is its poor labeling, but it's really incumbent on the publisher to decide, how is this going to be shaded? How is this going to be labeled? How obvious do we want it to be? When we're looking at social promotion, for example, we always put in sponsored content by and then the name of the sponsor, because we're not in the business of tricking people. We want people to be drawn in because they're actually interested in whatever the article or video is about. We don't want people to be drawn in because they think that this is a cover for an edit story.
Yeah, and Bill, so obviously you manage a brand blog, but do you ever get people reading the content and, even though it's Nielsen.com, not realizing that it's branded and then, saying, oh, I didn't realize that this was, from a brand?
Yeah, it would be pretty embarrassing if someone stumbled across the content and thought it was from the Times or something. So I don't have that experience, but certainly, the user experience is paramount. We want to make sure that the content is as good as if it were somewhere else. And certainly there's no trickery. It's definitely Nielsen content, but the integrity of the content of the content is what matters most. So much in line, but clearly, obviously, within a branded environment.
Definitely. And so this also ties into the quality of the content itself, but when brands buy content, they obviously expect it to get some traffic, which can come through placing it on the homepage, it can come through posting it on social. I think BuzzFeed even has used Spark, which is a news aggregator, to drive traffic to sponsored stories. Does and should branded content programs have a place on a publication's social accounts, and how else can you bring traffic to them?
Yeah, so as a branded content producer, social plays a major role in engagement and getting our content out to the people that want to read our content. Couldn't do what we do without it. And with respect to distribution channels outside of social, I think one of the things that's noteworthy about what Nielsen's doing is, we recently signed a content licensing agreement with a company called NewsCred, and NewsCred is now packaging Nielsen content in bundles that it then markets to other companies and brands for use on their digital channels. And I think that that's a really great way for us to increase our exposure. And B, I think it's important that, just getting to the title of this panel from an integrity perspective, it speaks really highly about the content that we are putting out there. And to my knowledge, in my conversations with NewsCred, I don't believe their library of content includes other branded content. So I think that speaks volumes about about the content we are putting out. So.
I mean, we use our social feeds too. We don't use Facebook because we're a publisher, and I think Facebook maybe frowns on publishers putting sponsored content in their feeds. But we do use Twitter a lot. And one thing that we learned over the course of this year was that it was kind of editorial best practice to kind of let, we use a platform called Social Flow, pull in the stories, as it saw fit to kind of optimize against traffic and stuff like that. And so basically we had been doing the same thing, but we found on one or two occasions, like all the sponsored tweets would be grouped together, and then suddenly our Twitter feed looks like it's the September version of Vogue. That's not what we want, obviously. We want to make sure that it's spread out. So now we schedule them. And I think that's key to any publisher who wants to include sponsored content in their social feed, moderation.
Yeah, I think social is essential. It's a great way of promotion. As Deanna mentioned before, we too say sponsor story, or sponsored, before we list a tweet or a Facebook post or an Instagram. For us, what's really important is not to cannibalize any of our channels. So if we are using that sponsor tag even on one of our verticals feeds, we're careful not to do too much of it, so it still preserves its integrity. Additionally, we created a new handle, New York FYI. It's at NYFYI, and that's meant to be kind of a localized place to find a lot of our branded initiatives, Twitter stakes, what have you, things like that, events that we've been working on that are branded.
Definitely. And so all of you, I think, started your careers out in traditional journalism. And so traditionally, editors have been able to sort of ignore what the sales team was doing and just focus on what the edit team was doing. But I think most of us probably remember about a year ago when Atlantic had done a deal with the Church of Scientology and posted that piece of branded content. I would just have to wonder if the editors and writers on that site sort of cared that this organization was getting a byline on the same site as them. If you're the editor of the site and anything kind of looks like it came through you. So do you think that editors at a site should have veto power over what goes on as branded content? And should branded content producers have that background in journalism?
Well, yeah, for sure they should have a background in journalism. I mean, I think that when you are a journalist, when you're trained that way, and whether or not you leave the profession to pursue marketing, you develop those kind of fast-twitch muscles that we see clients, they just don't have. Brands are producing content 3-4 months, a year in advance, and they can't turn around a story in a day, let alone a couple of hours, and that's why they're here. That's why we're here. That's why they tap us. What was the second part of the question?
Should editors have veto power over branded content?
Yeah, no, sorry guys, I don't think so. It's an ad. The Scientology piece aside, I mean, if we put something together at Digiday Content Studio that Edit didn't like, we would absolutely hear about it. And we might take it under advisement, but I've never had a situation where an editor is coming to us and saying no. And I think part of that is the editorial background, because we know where the line is. If you're an editor, you want someone with editorial background on that wall. You need us on that wall, because we have, kind of the right sensibility for this, and we can tell the client, this isn't going to fly, this is too on message, you're going to look dumb. We do that all the time.
Yes. I mean, I walked into a very well thought out situation. So thankfully when I came in, there was already a structure in place where, like I said before, there's a lot of communication between the advertising, marketing departments and editorial departments. So I actually have never seen anything vetoed. And I think that was put in place so that it would never get to that point. I think at the inception, having that communication, you just avoid that situation altogether. And, I'd like to underscore your point about journalists moving over to the other side. I think we understand those demographics really, really well because we would write for those demographics. I think we understand ethics editorial concern. We care about ASME. You know, all of these things are, all of these points are things we were trained to understand and to respect. And that's, aside from that, I think we just have the raw writing skills. We hustle and we're good. So, you know, I'm very proud to see a lot of journalists over in the branded content side. It actually, I think, lends a lot of credence to branded content.
Well, I can't speak to the veto question, but I can certainly comment that I am working in a marketing capacity, and it's uncomfortable. So I view myself more on the editorial side, and I'm okay with that.
I'm okay, you're okay.
We're
Thank you.
okay.
Yeah, that's what it's all about.
I think if we can help brands be just a little more authentic, then we can all sleep well at night.
Well, that also, I should just also add, that's a lot of times why brands choose to come to one of our publications, because they know they're getting a journalist, somebody with that training, writing the branded content. So they're going to get something perhaps a little more finessed.
And so Contently, which is a company that provides content marketing for brands, came up with a study saying that two-thirds of readers felt deceived upon finding out that something was sponsored, and 58% thought a news site lost credibility when they ran sponsored content. So how do you keep from losing trust, numbers aside, and is it inevitable to lose trust if you're doing branded content?
Well, obviously, I don't think so, because I'm sitting here. You know, I think the question is it good? And is it valuable? And if it's good and it's valuable, then it has merit. You know, not all branded content is journalism. Some of it is just a really funny cat video. You know, BuzzFeed did a fantastic video for Purina called Dear Kitty. I'd urge you all to go to YouTube and watch it. Not right now. But, you know, and it's good. It's good branded content. It's entertaining. It's right on voice for BuzzFeed. So are they, you know, I don't know. I'd like to see I would like to see who they polled, quite frankly, because I've seen also polls that pulled people off of casino floors. And I don't know. I just think if you're wandering around a casino at like 1 in the morning, maybe you're not the most reliable.
I think that going back to an original point, we do say sponsor story at the top. So when someone like John Oliver complains about it, we're going to great lengths to make sure a person knows from the get-go that they're reading branded content. There's no deceit there. There's no point in deceit. That's antithetical to what we're doing. Our stories are, like I said, I think, like you said, I think we can dig deeper into stories. Like right now we're working on a campaign with Revlon, and I have to give Revlon a lot of credit, called the Provocateurs, and rather than just choose, you know, what's the industry calls influencers, they wanted to go with women that are making a change in the world. So we have women who are, you know, working with villagers, creating products and selling them in the US so that they get a decent cut of that money. We're working with other people who are helping to empower, or profiling other women who are helping to empower other women in the workplace. There's a lot of endlessly fascinating stories there, and I think that the whole world of branded content is something, you know, I bring them up because it's been such a pleasant experience. They in particular get. That's why you want branded content as a brand, because you're going to get something deeper and smarter and more thoughtful, and that after effect is lingering. You know, the association of that with the brand is lingering. I think that's powerful.
As a branded content producer, I don't worry about losing trust. For me, it's the opposite. My goal is to gain trust, and so that's where the journalistic integrity comes into play, where, you know, the focus is on great content and building stories and insights and things that are meaningful for people, and that's job one. And I think, you know, I wondered at the start, which was about 2 years ago, whether or not the content would be able to stand up, whether or not it would be able to sort of live as real content, or whether it would always be viewed as a brand product. And, you know, you know, not to harp on the license deal, but, you know, having a license deal with a content marketing firm that's then going to put that content, you know, with BBDO, the Hartford, Barclays, those are real clients that have asked for Nielsen content because of because of the content itself, not because of a label or a sponsored banner. So, so for me, I feel like the gaining of the trust is growing.
Yeah, so gaining trust through quality content sort of seems like the main theme here. And so in contrast to other social networks, Instagram and Tumblr, which do native ads, actually have creative standards. So they're not just taking someone's money and putting whatever they want into their apps. They actually want it to be creative and to be high quality. So for publications, do advertisers come in wanting to just sort of buy space and do whatever they want? And how receptive are they to your feedback?
Yeah, so that one's on me. So good content, good result. Bad content, bad result. It's, if we look at it as an ad and the ad doesn't gel with what it's sitting next to, people are going to lose interest, they're going to lose trust, and they're going to go somewhere else to find what they want. So everyone's, everyone's in it together, and if they don't work together, everyone loses.
Yeah, I think that's why they do want the branded content. That's the difference between branded content and a placement ad. They would just buy a placement ad if they wanted their own words up there. Speaking again to user experience or reader engagement, they want that engagement, and that's why they come to us. They want something that people want to read. They want it to be smart, and they want it to be well thought out. And as such, especially I think because we're all journalists, advertisers, to their credit, have been very open about feedback, about batting around ideas. If we think something is not a great idea, I tell them, I don't think this will stick with our readers. Maybe we should rethink it. And they've been pretty amenable to that.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a kind of particular space because we're B2B, and a lot of our clients are tech companies. And, they're very open, I have to say, for the most part, to taking feedback from us. And I think part of that is because Digiday has a really particular voice and perspective on the industry, and it's hard when you're coming from a marketing background to harness skepticism and kind of consider that there might be other points that you can make. But they do understand that branded content is not the place for cheerleading. It's the place for, perhaps making a case if you're going to write something that's more of a point of view, or doing some kind of explainer if people are genuinely confused about your technology, or, handing people advice if you really feel like you have a good insight that can help them. They're generally open.
So last year, Simple Reach, which is a company that measures success of native ads, came out with a leaderboard of branded content across the web, which mostly was a publicity stunt. But it brings a good question to mind. How do you measure branded content? How are brands measuring success? And, is it different? Is it the same as editorial? And how is that changing?
Well, I think it's actually evolving, and that's a really great question, because it used to just be how many eyeballs am I getting? And now there's other elements. How long are people staying on the page? So there's a discussion now is perhaps length of stay more significant than how many people are just clicking on a link. There's also the question of what demographic am I reaching? People are coming to specific publications for specific demographics, specific readership. At each of our verticals has its own specific tone, and that's very reflective of the people who read the site, as well as in what I do. I try to speak to those people. So the advertisers want to reach very specific demographics now. So impressions are important, but I also think it starts to become quality of the person reading what you're putting out there. And that's maybe how metrics have shifted lately, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's for sure. Digiday has a very particular audience. It's people that are really interested in the future of digital media and marketing. And so when people come to us, they're not looking for, a general interest audience. They're looking for really specific audience. So we try to tell people that, explain to our clients that, the people that are reading your story are the ones that are actually really, really interested in what you have to say. We also like to point a lot to time on page and engaged time, because if people are spending 3-4 minutes with your piece of content, they're really absorbing it. I mean, yes, there's occasionally that person who's had your tab open for like 12 minutes, but there aren't enough of them, and I've seen the metrics, to kind of like skew it. So we know we're doing a good job when people are really absorbing what, our clients have to say.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I might add is that, in addition to eyeballs, time on page, I think that one of the things that I notice, Nielsen covers a vast array of markets and sectors and topics, so I know automatically that something on smartphones or Twitter TV ratings is going to have way more page views and way more engagement than something on, meat sales, for retailers. And so when I do get asked about, should we pull back on certain articles that aren't performing as well, I do need to take into consideration the fact that, those articles, even if they aren't performing to the same standards, there's still a lot of value in them, because I know that the audience that reads them, in all honesty, those might be the ones that we might obtain as clients. The people that are reading things that pertain to TV or Twitter TV ratings, those people reading those are probably already clients. So, so I try to take all that with a grain of salt, but definitely the metrics that they talked about, as well as, the metrics that we get from video as well. The time people watch video, how much of a video, how much they replay it, all that comes into play too.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of metrics and a lot of different metrics for each client. So if someone comes in with something specifically that they want, say it's referrals to a product or awareness, would that determine what kind of content that you recommend that they create? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, again, we're a B2B focused organization. At least, the content studio side of it is. If somebody comes in and they want general awareness, we're going to point them to a different product than if they just want to put leads in their pipeline. If all you want is email addresses, then a content series about something really topical and interesting might not be the way to go. Maybe you want to go, create a specific asset that people are then going to want and download, and will give you their information for. So absolutely, yeah, it really all depends on what the business goal is in the end. And that's kind of an interesting part of the job that I've learned that was not part of my journalism training.
Oh, I have to agree with you too. There's brand awareness. We get some accounts that come to us for brand awareness. And then we get some accounts that come for, what I kind of like to call brand refinement. They want a specific audience. They want a specific, maybe education bracket, what have you, demographic. So that's the only thing I would add, is sometimes they want, people come to us for broader things, sometimes people come to us for more specific needs, and the way they relay that usually is through, we want more of this metric or that metric, absolutely.
I'm totally stealing brand refinement.
Brand refinement.
That's my
You heard
good
it here.
now.
Hashtag.
Yeah, and so as all of we did start as journalists and then move into branded content, maybe some publications that you guys are at are considering trying it out as a new revenue stream. So what would you say, what should they expect, and what does the process look like?
What should you expect? Hopefully money. Banner advertising is kind of suffering. I think anybody who's paying attention to the business of publishing knows that, and this is a new revenue stream for a lot of people. One of the things that I sometimes say, and now I'm going to say it on camera, I hope I don't get in trouble, is that one of the things I really miss from being a journalist is being able to tell someone on the phone that they can go straight to hell. I'm a nice person, I never actually put it that way. But, just generally having the independence to say, no, I'm not going to do that. You don't really have that independence anymore. And it's not because you don't have any pushback power. Like we said, you don't have any power to say that's not the greatest idea, but because now you're in a client service role. So there's that. So then you have to kind of be a little bit more conciliatory and subtle and kind of steer people rather than saying yes or no. But honestly, personally, it's been a real area of growth for me. I've become a much more well-rounded person and professional. So that's good. I don't know if I actually answered the question. Did I? I guess I did.
Yeah, and then also, what does the process look like when an advertiser actually comes to you and says, hey, I want to do content?
Why don't you take that one? I spoke a while.
Okay. When an advertiser comes to us and says, hey, we want to do content, at that point I would say, what are your goals? It's important to figure out where are you right now and where do you want to go, because this needs to be some sort of, be it metric or narrative, a journey. So that's where I would start. And then, of course, given what assets we have or whatnot, we try to build a campaign around that. And sometimes they don't know how much certain things would cost. And we don't solely do branded content a lot of times. We will do something like a homepage takeover. We might have an event to go along with that. So, branded content starts to grow into a bigger and bigger thing. And this isn't just as a added revenue stream, but it's also to give people cohesive 360 experiences, as it were, in understanding and exploring a brand. So it would probably start from, what is your immediate goal? What are we working with? And how big do you want to get with it?
Definitely. And Bill, so with your transition into managing branded content, what would you say that there was a learning curve, and what new skills have you learned?
Well, actually, unlike you, I can't actually tell people to go to hell. It doesn't happen that often, but content is paramount. I would like to think that I haven't completely changed how I approach what works and what doesn't. I think back when I started in journalism, everything was column inches and paste up and black and white halftoners and things. So obviously there's been a massive change in terms of how we produce content, but the story still matters. I definitely miss, I got to report on the Timothy McVeigh bombing, like way back, and I miss that kind of stuff. But all in all, my approach to producing content hasn't changed that much. I was a terrible writer when I started as a journalist, and I think from a growth perspective, I've learned how to look at the big picture. I've learned how to tell a cohesive story. I've learned how to remove the ancillary, the unnecessary. I've gotten really great at removing the fluff and the promotion, all of which lends itself to good content, regardless of whether it's branded or not.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point, because a lot of people that want to get into branded content right now have a marketing background, and there's definitely skill sets that fit in there, don't get me wrong, but the experience of sitting at a copy desk with a guy named Sully who's going to tell you that this needs to come out and this needs to be rewritten, and you're 8 column inches over, is invaluable. It's the best apprenticeship you could have as a writer. And so when I look for people to join us, I am very much looking for people who are journalists and have that kind of eye for efficiency and voice and getting to the core of a story. And that can be, through text, it can be through images, it can be through video, but, those are the ranks that I'm kind of combing through.
What's funny, and I'm sorry, but just on that point, when we hire folks now, I put them through an edit test, and before I took my job, they didn't test me, which I think was the biggest, crapshoot in the world. But I mentioned that was something that was necessary. It was a huge headache with HR because there was no real editorial culture. That was complete shell shock for them. But it's definitely something that I think is really necessary, because without it, you could end up with...
You don't know.
You don't... Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's fine. I was just going to add one point above and beyond that, too, is the ideation process, which is purely marketing word. I'd never heard that word, ideation,
it's a Nielsen word,
until I got into marketing. But that ideation process, I thought I would be behind in that. And I realized that because we had to be so scrappy as reporters and editors, we're really good coming up with well-researched, thoughtful ideas, even on the fly. Things that we know we can execute really well.
Yeah.
And I think that in branded content in particular is what sets journalists apart. It's so much easier to take a big idea and scale it down than to take a sliver of a kind of maybe we can do this and make it into something that works. And I think that we think big and know how to scale that down into something that's smartly executable.
Definitely. I think I've found as well that you start with a really big idea that, you want to pitch something that someone will actually buy, but then at the same time you have to balance it with what can I actually pull off. So it's a challenge. So we do have some time left for audience questions. I'm just going to ask the panelists one more question, and then after that we'll jump into audience questions. So I guess my last question would be if each of you could share what's one example of a piece of branded content you've done that was very successful and why?
Okay, I'm just going to jump right into, we did a piece of content with Parsley where we kind of advised them on what kind of piece they should write. And it was actually a piece that they authored and we kind of edited and consulted on. But it did well, and I was proud of it despite the fact that we didn't actually sit at the keyboard and type it. Because it really showed insight into our audience. They came up with something that was really meaty and well written, and despite the fact that they actually produced it, I kind of feel a little bit of like halo pride about it because, we did the consulting, we let them know what our audience wanted, and ultimately we did a good job as advisors, and I think that that's something that, Content Studio has kind of grown into, is a role as an advisor, because I think it's really easy when you're the person at the computer and you have complete control over your universe to come up with something that's really, really good. And it's a little harder when you're kind of, in that kind of advisory role. So there you go.
I have to go back to the Revlon project that's still sort of unfolding. I think it's a well-conceived project, and I think it's interesting, and the feedback has been really great, and the traffic going to those stories as well have been really great. It's just interesting women. We're not taking models or actresses, or we're not picking people because they're pretty per se. Many of them, all of them actually happen to be quite pretty, but these are professionals, people you can relate to, people you like, people who have things to say, and we get to profile them. And the response has been really great, and I'm very proud of it.
I had to think back a little bit myself. Nielsen does what's called the Global Survey, which is an annual survey where we poll a bunch of people around the world, and one of the topics that we look at every year is corporate social responsibility. I don't have a hand in the actual survey itself. I definitely help with the content that comes with it, which usually spans a campaign of 3 or 4 weeks or so. And last year, I wanted to make a contribution myself, and I started what I've sort of dubbed as these little Q&As where I put people in thought leadership roles on camera and talk to them about what we find. And it's a way to sort of extend the conversation. It's a way to put a face to the brand. It's much more human than simple text on a page. And that was the guinea pig for this little video project that I started. And I think I shot the first series of videos with a gentleman who I work with probably about 2 or 3 months after the report for corporate social responsibility actually posted. And I was able actually to leverage the 2 or 3 video segments that we used for about 6 or 8 months just throughout the year. Anytime something came up in the world, whether it was there was a day called Giving Tuesday or anything that was philanthropical out in the world, I was able to put something out on social media and tie it back to one of those 2 videos and really extend the breadth of this massive topic that's really important. And while it's a little small thing, I guess it was my thing that I sort of helped bring into this world that we're creating online. So I was kind of pleased with that.
Great, thanks. So moving on to audience questions. I think there's a microphone in the middle that if you have a question, you could just head over there.
Hi, I'm Alan Herzberger with the Oklahoman. I have a question about, each of you talked about content being important and that the clients being receptive to feedback on that. For the most part, I think I heard a couple times. Can you talk about some of the examples where maybe they weren't receptive, they wrote the story, this is what they want, and do you not take their money in that case?
Well, I think people don't come to us if they want to write their own stories. So just kind of fundamentally, People don't come to us if they want to write their own stories. They would just take out a placement ad. My experience has been that they want me to write it, they want the feedback. They don't always agree with the feedback, but there's always a conversation. So I think it's actually been more positive than one would think, than I would have even thought when I was a journalist going into this role.
Hi, I'm Michael Depp with Net News Check. I just wonder if any of you can speak to the prospect of a news organization tapping its own journalists to produce branded content, albeit in a fashion that is clearly labeled. The ethics of that, the navigability of doing that in terms of compromising those journalists. There's, some places are experimenting, talking about doing, working in that format. So what are your thoughts about that, please?
That's a great question.
Yeah, actually, I kind of need you to repeat your vision of this dystopian future. What was it exactly?
Well, the Globe and Mail in Toronto, for instance, are talking about this notion of tapping their own journalists to produce this content. Now, it would still be in a format that's branded, it's clear that it's paid for, but just the prospect of that being happen. I wonder to what extent you're aware of it happening, or if it does happen, is there any navigability, ethically speaking, of operating in that way?
Well, with respect to the Globe and Mail, that sounds like a really bad idea. The reason for that is, even if, for example, right, you have a health writer writing travel advertorial or something like that. I know I used advertorial, I shouldn't, but it's not. I don't know, that kind of that. I don't like that idea.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't have anything else to say about it.
Yeah, we have a very clear demarcation between editorial and people, myself, who write branded content. Perhaps that's old school, but that's what maintains and builds our reputation. It's to our core so important to us to keep those things separate.
Yeah, I would think that just from my days in journalism, I mean, you build up your credibility as a beat reporter in a certain field, and then if you go off grid and start doing something else, it just doesn't smell right.
I mean, even BuzzFeed, which, it has a very serious newsroom, right? But a lot of its sponsored content is listicles and lighter fare. They maintain a very serious church and state. And I would say if your business side is going to your reporters and asking them to write for them, say no.
Hi. Oh, sorry. I'm Simon. I work at a TV station in online marketing, and if I was to go back to my boss and kind of present this idea of doing branded content, using that as a kind of new revenue stream, what would I pitch to him as even the process of getting that started? Is the sales teams who are already selling banner ads, for example, are they speaking with their clients and mentioning that there's this new opportunity? Are we producing, test runs of videos or branded content articles before to showcase to them? How would you say about going about doing that?
Well, I think this is actually a great opportunity for your sales team, because branded content used to sort of be like an afterthought add-on, like a cool little thing to do, and now it's actually part of your, again, to use that term, brand narrative. You put a banner ad on a site, and that lets you know that's brand awareness. And then if you really want to know where the brand positions itself, who it's speaking to, why the brand matters to you, just to get a little more personal, that's where the branded content comes in. So I think that to some extent is the sell. Like, let's further that narrative past this is our logo and this is who we are, to something deeper, more about the brand.
And from a practical point of view, if you're talking about sponsored video in particular, and video is something that you guys produce quite well. You have the infrastructure, you have a studio. Again, we're not going to use the editorial folks, but if this is something that is your core competency, I would think it would be fairly inexpensive to get started, and CPMs on video are pretty good.
Ed Madison with University of Oregon. So as it relates to video content, I'm curious to what degree the three of you are engaged in that, because you've been talking a lot about written content, and then also about pricing and whether a production fee gets included in that, and finally, ownership of those assets afterwards.
So pricing, and then I think it's a great question, who owns the content? You know, could a brand run it on their own site later?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so the point of view that I take is that if we've written it for you, you should be free to use it somewhere else as a lead gen or as a, you know, as a blog post or, you know, driving to it. Other folks take like a licensing point of view. I think that's probably something that's going to get refined with time, as we see what the pros and cons of both approaches are.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you're paying for the branded content, you know, there should be an initial discussion about where you want it to be in addition to your particular site. But I think it's fair for an advertiser to have that expectation that they're going to maybe run a photograph on their social feeds, or perhaps blurb or run the whole story on their own blog if they have one. But that's a discussion you should probably have at the onset, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, and that any talent who's a part of that branded content, if you do have talent that's a part of it, knows, as well as a photographer or videographer. I mean, you have to think about rights.
Hi, good afternoon. Paul Vogel from Source Media. I wanted to kind of push this up to the level of corporate administration and ask you if, you know, in terms of governance, at Source Media, we have a chief content officer who runs the newsroom, does keep the journalists on one side of the wall. But he also is, you know, he really does control the governance over what the branded content department is doing as well. I was wondering if your organizations had sort of a similar type of construct, if there were folks at more of the senior upper management, and how the governance structure is to kind of keep the two products separate, the journalistic product and the branded product.
So yeah, so you have the studio, which I guess is separate than editorial. How is it structured, you know, in management? Is it its own department rather than being part of marketing or part of editorial?
Oh, okay, sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing the mic, I apologize. Yeah, well, we're a very small organization. We're not part of a great big media operation, and it's pretty simple, is that, you know, I run the content studio, our editor-in-chief, Brian Morrissey, runs editorial, and we both report into the CEO. So there's not a lot of layers there, but, you know, we're still keeping it church and state.
Yeah, we're under publishing, technically, advertising, marketing, creative services. We view ourselves as a creative agency of sorts. So we see editorial as editorial and us as a creative agency of sorts. And they have their staff, we have our staff, and again, it's really important, I think, to keep that communication going, but it's also important to preserve that this is what they do and this is what we do.
Lamar Graham from New Jersey Advanced Media. A couple of kind of related questions. Number one, how do you guys sell sponsored content? Is it that an advertiser buys a package of a certain size and then sponsored content, you know, becomes a factor at a certain price point, or will you sell pieces of sponsored content individually? And then, you know, secondly, how do you talked a little earlier about metrics. Exactly what are you communicating back to the client? That it's not just impressions, but are you also communicating shares, likes, that sort of data? Thank you.
We're communicating to them whatever they request. So when they come at us, you know, in the pitch phases, they'll say, these are the kinds of metrics we're interested in hearing and exploring and building, and that's what we'll report back to them. But we definitely have a discussion with them as to what their needs are and what will be reported, and we create a report for them. You know, everything's up in front with them.
Yeah, and speaking to the first part of your question, what I've usually seen is that it's bought as part of a larger package that might include display media, but I've also seen advertisers come in and want to buy just the content without display media.
Knight Stivender with the Tennessean in Nashville. Related question, what segments do you see as the most interested in sponsored content? And what is your B2B strategy in getting those clients on board?
Well, we work primarily with, for now, tech companies that are aiming at a business audience. So for me to say, programmatic versus MarTech versus, cloud software providers is not providing a ton of insight for the broader audience. In terms of, selling it through, we had a fairly long ramp up for Content Studio, but then when we started churning, we really started churning, and I think that part of it was simply kind of letting people know that we're here and we can do this, and this should absolutely be part of your strategy, and then just having a sales team that just goes for it.
Yeah, I think most people just come to us already. We work across, from an advertising perspective, so many verticals, from banks, automotive industry, fashion, beauty, television, movies, and I feel pretty much across the board, most people are very interested in branded content. So I don't know if it skews one way or the other particularly.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Kim Fox from Scribble Live. I do a lot of editorial consulting on both the media side and the brand side. And one of the questions I have for you guys is, as I'm trying to build talent and retain them, a question I get asked quite often by journalists is, if I go into that space, will I lose my credibility? I'm just curious to see what you guys.
That sounds like a question for the audience. I don't know. I don't think so. Look, I'm a practical person, so because I am working on, branded content now, does that mean that in 10 years I can't switch back? I don't know. Maybe what it really comes down to is, what am I going to be covering? Personally speaking, I know I can do it, but I don't know what the prevailing opinion is going to be.
Yeah, when I was switching over from editorial to branded content and strategy and things like that, I would always give full disclosure to any sort of editors who came to me and asked me to write stories for them, to say, this is what I'm working on, here are my clients, if you think there's any conflicts of interest, I want you to know up front. And generally, I wouldn't take an assignment even from the get-go if I thought it would be a conflict with one of my clients, because I don't want my name on that anyways. So it worked out okay. They like that you're upfront about things, transparent about things.
Yeah. What do you think, Bill?
I think. It's interesting. The reason I'm no longer in traditional journalism is because the company I was working for was sold. And so the company that bought the gaming publishing firm that I was at allowed me to keep my job with the understanding that I would move to Vegas. And having grown up in Los Angeles and wanting to move to New York where I could be a star at the Wall Street Journal or New York Times or something, I took a pass on that and went to work for Standard & Poor's. And I thought that was going to be sort of the 1 year, 2 year stepping stone into the next step. And I don't know. So do I feel like less of a journalist now? I don't. I'm sure people probably look at me that way, but I don't know. I can still write. I can still blog. I can still, I don't know. It could be worse, right?
Well, my journalist friends have been really supportive.
Yeah?
Yeah, the state of journalism is, it's very unsteady right now. This is a viable avenue for a lot of journalists to go down, and I think that when they see, I'll show them my work, and then they're okay with it.
I wholeheartedly love the work I produce. Mm-hmm. I think my biggest critic is myself, wondering what other people think.
Sure.
So, you know, like I said, I stand behind everything that I put out. I just wonder whether or not I'm viewed as the guy that switched teams, you know, gone to the other side. So,
Yeah, I mean, if it's a question of ability, if you can do it, you can do it. I mean, I don't think it's like you put on the white hat and then you put on the black hat and you have to wear the black hat forever. But
which hat is
I know, which is which. I don't know, it depends on who you ask. But, you know, I mean, I guess it really has to do with the person doing the hiring. That's really the only thing I can think about.
All right, well, a huge thanks to you to our panelists, and thanks so much to all of you for coming out.